Welcome to Real Paranormal Activity, the network. Entertainment you'll enjoy.
You are listening to an RPA production, where people gather. LaFosse Corporation, LLC.
Hello, my Mysterians. This is Terry from Texas, your presenter on Terry's Mysterious Moments. Occasionally, I get a request to do a story on time slips. And I'm going to do it from my point of view, which is time slips in movies that I consider some of my favorite movies. Now, we all know that time slips are, it's like you've stepped through a door in time to the past or maybe even the future. I would say the past more likely, because the future hasn't happened yet. But you step through a doorway and you experience time 100 years ago. Things going on that are far in the past, obviously. Such as the two ladies who were visiting the Palace of Versailles in France back in the early 1900s. They were walking through the gardens and were asking for a particular place to go, and upon receiving instructions, they went there. But when they got there, they said it was like in the time of Marie Antoinette. Older clothing, fancier looks, not as busy of a city. And they wandered around for a while, and finally when they reached the place they were going to, they snapped back into their own time. So that makes for an interesting conversation. You know, you have this time slip, and what are you going to tell people? You know, they're going to think you're nuts, and as well they might, but you know you had it. Another pretty famous time slip is the ladies who were working at Gettysburg College, I think it's called. They were putting in overtime late one night in Old Dorm, I think is what it's called. And they decided that's enough for the day, so they loaded everything up, walked to the elevator, and punched the first floor so they could go out to their cars and go home. Well, it got a little weird when the elevator just went right on past the first floor and stopped in the basement. These ladies thought, well, there's just something wrong with the elevator, and we're just going to the basement. We can go back up to the first floor. But when the doors opened, they didn't see a dusty old storage room full of file cabinets and maybe desks and tables and whatever else. They witnessed a scene from hell. The door opened and it was a Civil War hospital, apparently from the Battle of Gettysburg. Men screaming in pain, doctors yelling for help, yelling at orderlies, yelling at nurses, whatever. And they saw amputations being done, amputations having been done, blood all over the place, they said. And of course, this just frightened the dog out of them, and they stepped back, jumped back on the elevator and started pressing the buttons, as you would expect. And one person looked up and saw him and started walking toward him with his arms outreached like, help us, please. We need help. The elevator doors closed. The ladies got out on the first floor and beat feet to their cars and left. It's now a part of history. Well, I love history. I really do. but I also love movies. And I think it's interesting that some of my favorite movies have to do with time slips. Take, for instance, Groundhog Day. Groundhog Day is a very interesting movie in that it takes place during an actual event. Fictionalized, of course, for this movie. But a TV weatherman enters a time loop wherein he experiences the same day for hundreds, perhaps even thousands of years, because they never say how long it took. But it's all for his betterment. He's a narcissistic personality, and the powers that be, I call him God, some people call the gods, other people call karma, have put him in a cosmic detention study hall where he experiences the entire day, but on the next same day, he begins to correct his errors bit by bit until finally he achieves a completely new day as a different man. He has learned something about himself and how to be different, how to be kinder to people. Maybe some of us could use do-overs on some of our own mistakes. I think the classic time slip movie is not an accidental time slip, it's an intentional. H.G. Wells wrote a story called The Time Machine, and in it, a British scientist develops what he says is an actual time machine. His co-workers, yeah, right, sure, whatever you say. Well, he decides to prove it. And he disappears during supper, goes and gets on his time machine, sets the time for somewhere in the future, hits the starter switch and sets the levers, and away it goes. It takes him to the year 802,000 and some change, where things are beautiful. It's a very garden-like area, and he comes in contact with a tribe of people called the Eloi. Fair-skinned, light-haired, beautiful people, but very childlike. He kind of falls in love with one of them, but comes to find out that there is a darkness to this Garden of Eden. And it's because the people who actually do the work to keep the planet running are called Morlocks, and they live underground. And they are, for lack of a better word, slug-like creatures. Their eyes don't work well in the sunlight. They're just evil-looking creatures. But they make occasional raids to the surface to grab Eloys for both meals and work. Well, he's there during one of these raids and his girlfriend gets taken, so he decides he's going to help him out. Which he does. He goes into the Morlock underground and fights a lot of the Morlocks and frees a lot of the Eloi. In the meantime, they have stolen his time machine, so he has to find it. Well, things happen and there's a blast underground and it destroys the Morlock complex, but he doesn't know it that his girlfriend was underground at the time. Well, he makes his way back to his time machine, gets in it, goes back to London, emerges just a few minutes after he left, and tells his friends what has happened. And they're like, yeah, again, right, sure, whatever. So they leave. And in keeping touch with the scientist, one of his friends comes back and he's working on the time machine again. The guy says, "You're not going to do it again." He says, "No, I'm done with that." But when the guy leaves, he jumps on the time machine and goes back into the future. But he had told his friend, he said, "If I'm not back in a certain amount of time, then I'm not coming back." Days, weeks, months go by, and he never returns. So he must have gone back into the future to save his girlfriend and live with the Eloi, or was killed in the process. Made for a very good movie, one of George Powell's movies. Another movie that's based on the time machine is a movie called Time After Time, where in this movie, the actual author H.G. Wells has invented the time machine. And somehow, in the time he's living in London is the time of Jack the Ripper. And again, Jack the Ripper turns out to be someone he knows who steals his time machine and goes into the future, winds up in San Francisco, and begins killing again. Well, Wells goes into the future. He's able to retrieve the time machine due to some safeguards he had put in it, goes into the future and hunts down Jack the Ripper, falls in love with a woman from the future as part of the storyline. Jack the Ripper steals the time machine again and goes back in time, or goes somewhere in time, but he didn't set the safeguards right. And he's the one that disappears, not the time machine. So Wells and his lady friend go back into time, into his own regular time, and live, I guess, happy for the rest of their lives. One of my absolute favorite movies dealing with time travel is The Final Countdown. And it deals with the USS Nimitz, an aircraft carrier, a nuclear aircraft carrier that goes through a time storm and winds up on December 6th, 1941. So here's the dilemma. Do they try to stay hidden, out of sight of 1941 history, or do they come forward and say, look, we've got one ship out there that can probably take care of the Japanese fleet, or a lot of it? Well, they decide to go ahead and join the battle. Their commander of the air group is a history buff, and he's writing a book on the Battle of Pearl Harbor. So he knows all these things that are going on at the time, and he tries to not change anything. But as life would have it, humans get involved and things get messed up. Well, he winds up getting stuck in 1941 just as the ship goes through another storm and reverts back to 1979. So on the ship, this whole time has been a troubleshooter working for this company. And when they get back to Pearl Harbor, he comes off the ship and he's being picked up by his boss, whom nobody has seen personally. So the driver comes up, gets him, takes him back to the car, and when he opens the door, it's the commander of the air group, much aged, 30 years later, who is his boss. And this man has apparently made all of the right decisions without changing the future. And they get in the car and ride off together. It's a very interesting film. And a thought that I have a lot of times, like, where would I go if I had access to military hardware of the modern type? Where would I go to help a certain group of fighters? And personally, being a Texan, I would go back to the Alamo. I figure 3 or 4 50 caliber machine guns, a bunch of M16s, grenades, whatever else. Santa Anna would have gone home with his tail between his legs, if not in his hands. Anyway, there's another warlike or wartime movie called The Philadelphia Experiment that's based on a fact, or supposed fact, where these scientists were trying to figure out a way to cloak ships from radar. It involved a lot of electricity and a lot of power. And they tried it on the ship called the Eldridge, sitting in Philadelphia Harbor. Well, something went terribly wrong. There was too much power. There was not enough power. There was just the wrong time to try this. But the Eldridge actually disappeared from the harbor. And some stories say that it wound up in Norfolk, Virginia for a few minutes, and then disappeared again and wound up in Philadelphia. But when they went on the ship, there were sailors who were stuck in walls, stuck in the decking, burned severely, gone mad, gone crazy. So, maybe it's not nice to fool with Mother Nature. There's a trilogy called Back to the Future that deals with time travel, and it's a good story. It's entertaining. It's not earth-shattering. It's not life-changing. It's just entertainment. In Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, they travel back from their time to find humpback whales to take back to their time to answer an alien probe that they don't have the answer for, but it takes whale song. And it adds some interesting concepts to the whole subject. Another movie that I liked was Time Cop, a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie. And it starts off with something I'm very happy to have seen. These Confederates on wagons are traveling a back road, and there's a man standing out in the middle of the road. He stops them. And he tells them he wants the gold that's on the wagon. Well, the Confederates were not going to give it up without a fight, but this man has 2 machine pistols, and he kills all the Confederates. Well, there's a book that's called Guns of the South that deals very similar with that idea. And the people that have stolen the gold are South Africans who want to help the United States, Southern people of the United States, win the Civil War and become a racist nation. Well, there are other things that happen different times, and it produces the paradox of, if you could be in 2 places at one time, should you meet? And the answer to that is no. There's another movie, and it's the last one I'm going to touch on. It's called Somewhere in Time. Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour. It's a very interesting movie because they use the concept of the trip to Versailles as this professor's saying that he had been through time in a very similar method. Christopher Reeve plays a young man named Richard, who is a budding playwright, and he is celebrating after the successful opening of his first produced play, when an old lady approaches him, puts a gold pocket watch in his hand, and says, "Come back to me." Well, he doesn't know who she is. Everybody else at the party is just stunned silent. Well, she then turns and walks away. And, he goes on through life, and it's several years later, and his relationship with his girlfriend is breaking up, so he decides to go take some time away. And he happens to go to Mackinac Island up in Michigan. Now, Mackinac Island supposedly does not allow automobiles on the island. But for the filming, they did. He drives up to the Grand Hotel and goes in and gets a room, is in line to get a room, but he's got some time to go before supper. So he goes walking around, and he goes into the Hall of History. And he finds a picture of a woman on the wall that it's a Mona Lisa look. There's just something about her look that you can't tell what she's thinking. So he stares at this picture, and he winds up falling in love with this woman, but there's no nameplate on the picture. So he goes and asks the porter, who's the lady in the hall? He says, oh, that's an actress from the 19 teens who performed here at the theater. And she quit acting right after. No one knows why. Finds out who she is. He goes to where she supposedly lived. Finds out that the night that she delivered the watch to him, she died. Well, he goes into research on time travel, and he remembers he had a professor that talked about time travel. So he goes and asks him, how did you do it? And basically the man tells him that he self-hypnotized to believe that he was in a previous century. And when he opened his eyes, his room looked different. The sounds of the city were different. He said, but it lasted a short time because he realized that couldn't be. So Richard decides he's going to try this. He goes and gets an old suit of clothes, changes his money for money of the time, and goes to the hotel, gets into the room that he's checked into, puts on his suit and money and all that good stuff, sits down on the bed and has a tape recorder trying to hypnotize himself into believing it's 1912 or whatever it is. And he can't do it because the tape player is right beside him. So he puts it under the bed and lays down, and while listening to it, he goes to sleep. And when he wakes up, he's in the same room, but it's furnished differently. So he sneaks out of the room, goes down to the front desk, and asks if he can check into a room. Well, he has seen the sign-in book from that time period, and he realizes that he had been there and he had a certain room. Well, the guy was going to give him a different room, so he talks him into the other room. He meets the actress. They fall in love. The actress's manager tries to put a stop to it because there is a theory that even the manager is a time traveler and knows her capabilities as an actress, knows that she's going to be famous. But they fall in love, and the manager tries to do away with Richard, tries to keep him tied up while they leave, but she stays. She refuses to go. And he thinks he's lost her. He's depressed. Well, she sees him from a distance, starts screaming out his name, and if you've seen the movie, you remember that, Richard! Several times. And they meet down the staircase going from the hotel down to the lawn, and they go back to the room, and they're having their wonderful time. They're eating a picnic on the floor, and she criticizes his suit. It's too old. And he stands up, puts on his vest, and he's saying, you got pockets for change. And he reaches into one of his pockets and pulls out a penny from 1979, which breaks the spell, and it starts sending him back to his regular time. Well, she realizes he's going, and she doesn't want him to go. Well, when he gets back to the hotel, he starts mourning the loss of his relationship with this woman and grieving to the point of not eating, not seeing anybody, not going outside, just sitting in front of the window. Now, this being Michigan, I don't know how cold summers get, but it's apparently a chilly time that he's sitting in front of this window, and he gets sick. Well, the porter he had talked to before breaks into the room with the doctor, and they get him onto the bed, but it's too late. Richard dies, and as he dies, you see what must be his spirit, the viewpoint of his spirit going up and through the ceiling and into whiteness, and he shows up, and there's the actress waiting for him. It's a beautiful movie. I first saw it back in 1980, and I've loved it ever since. Well, I know that there's more mysterious stories of time slips that apparently people have gone through, but I wanted to talk about those movies because they're good. They give you a viewpoint that maybe you've never had before. And do time slips actually happen? Apparently they do. I don't know what causes them. I don't know if it's a mental thing. And I'm not saying mental illness. I'm just saying it's something that your mind concocts for you. But anyway, that's what I've got for this week. And I hope you've enjoyed it. I enjoyed bringing it to you because, like I said, those are some of my favorite movies. I hope you'll come back again for another episode of Terry's Mysterious Moments. And be safe this week, y'all. Have a good 4th of July. Bye-bye.